working on vaccine mandate cases still, and I have a case pending in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers sort of the Michigan, Ohio area. So we're appealing a dismissal of the lawsuit there and have hopes that the Sixth Circuit will understand more than the district court what the constitutional problems were here. Another area of law I've been very involved with is First Amendment issues when it comes to government trying to censor or government using big tech to censor views that it doesn't like. So, for instance, I think one of the most common examples of this is Twitter, where, Twitter frequently will suspend people or label posts misleading that diverge from the government's message on various matters, especially when it comes to COVID. And I think there's substantial evidence that the government is involved in telling big tech what to do and coercing it. And that turns it into state action. So far, our lawsuit on this issue was dismissed, but we're also appealing that also in the Sixth Circuit. So
it's very interesting. Both of those are very applicable to our Canadian situation as well. Let me ask you first about the mandate, the vaccine mandate appeal that you're looking at. My first question is there a problem in the United States where the other side, where the government would say, well, that matter is moot because we're no longer enforcing that? Are they still enforcing vaccine mandates in the areas you're suing? And if they're not, does that stop you from getting a ruling from a higher court?
Yeah, that's a great question. So mootness is one of the big issues that lawyers have faced, not just with vaccine mandates, but the COVID restrictions in general. So what often happens is, you get in front of the judge and the lockdown has ended or the mask mandate has ended, but that the, governor or the mayor might bring it back in a few months. But then the other side, the government argues it's moot. There's no live controversy is what that means. There has to be a live case or controversy. So you can circumvent that by showing that the issue is, or the circumstances are likely to be repeated again. But that's a disputed matter. Now, in our case, that's not an issue because Michigan still has a vaccine mandate. And
really?
Now, yeah. The universities are the worst on this. The supposed bastions of enlightenment, are just forcing their 30-year-old or 22-year-old students to get vaccines and boosters, often when they've already had COVID. We know the vaccine doesn't stop transmission. We know that the risk profile for young people is much higher.
Isn't that interesting? And I'm going to come back to that question a little bit later, but let me first take the second thing you mentioned, which is Twitter and how government contracts out or outsources censorship to private companies. And I can see how that would be an attempt to evade constitutional scrutiny. In Canada as well, our Charter of Rights, which is not as strong as your Bill of Rights, only applies to government actors, not to private parties. So Twitter and other big tech companies, when they do bad things to you, you don't have a lot of recourse. Do you have evidence that the government is pushing, is bargaining, is making deals with Twitter or other big tech companies to do their bidding? Another point of view might be, well, no, they're just like birds of a feather. They harmonize, they get into formation. No one's forcing them to. It's just they're all woke censors instinctively. So it's not surprising that a Silicon Valley, San Francisco-based liberal firm is censoring, but there's no smoking gun showing that the White House ordered them. How are you getting over that? Maybe there's confidential things you don't want to disclose to me, but I would imagine that showing some link that the government asked for it and Twitter gave it, as opposed to Twitter doing it organically. Is that an issue in these court battles?
Yeah, so our case was dismissed along with a number of others, actually all in the same week, even though they were in different jurisdictions. And that's exactly what the judge said. The judge said, you can't show that this was happening because of the government. These companies were censoring people for misinformation prior to COVID. But I believe the judge got it completely wrong. And I think that will come forth in subsequent lawsuits. We have, government officials on record, Biden, his former press secretary, Jennifer Psaki, Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of DHS, I believe, all on the record making statements like big tech isn't, Twitter, Facebook aren't doing enough to censor this, skepticism of the vaccines, people who spread what's called misinformation, quote unquote misinformation, which just means something that differs from what the government says that's actually often acknowledged to be right in the future, like, masks don't work very well to stop the spread or the vaccines don't stop transmission. So, the fact that we have these people on the record saying the companies need to do more, that means that, they were coercing the companies to do more. And they're making explicit threats about regulation and other legal penalties that could be levied. I mean, it's my opinion that if the founding fathers, could have envisioned the internet and social media, they would have seen that this was a clear First Amendment violation. I mean, what you're doing is you're having the government is dictating the messages, what views are allowed to be heard and what views are not. And the fact that it's using a private company to do so doesn't really change that.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday, I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.